The Triassic (TRAASK) is a geologic period and system that extends from roughly 250 to 200 Maya, an interval of 51.04 million years. It is the first period of the Mesozoic era, and lies between the Permian and Jurassic periods. Both the start and end of the period are marked by major extinction events. The Triassic was named in 1834 by Friedrich von Alberti, after the three distinct rock layers that are found throughout Germany and northwestern Europe: red beds, capped by marine limestone, followed by a series of terrestrial mud and sandstones, called the Trias. The Triassic began in the wake of the Permian-Triassic extinction event, which left the Earth's biosphere impoverished. It would take well into the middle of the period for life to recover its former diversity. Theropods and archosaurs were the chief terrestrial vertebrates during this time. A specialized subgroup of archosaurs, dinosaurs, first appeared in the late Triassic but did not become dominant until the succeeding Jurassic. The first true mammals, themselves a specialized subgroup of theropods, also evolved during this period, as well as the first flying vertebrates, the pterosaurs, who like the dinosaurs were a specialized subgroup of archosaurs. The vast supercontinent of Pangaea existed until the mid-Triassic, after which it began to gradually rift into two separate land masses, Laurasia to the north and Gondwana to the south. The global climate during the Triassic was mostly hot and dry, with deserts spanning much of Pangaea's interior. However, the climate shifted and became more humid as Pangaea began to drift apart. The end of the period was marked by yet another major mass extinction, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event, wiping out many groups and allowing dinosaurs to assume dominance in the Jurassic. Dating and subdivisions. Key events in the Triassic view discuss ED at -255, -250, -245, -240, -235, -230, -225, -220, -215, -210, -205. -200, PZMESOZOIC Permian TRIASSIC Jurassic EARLYMIDDLELATE and Guano-Lane Kyananisian Ladinian Carnian Norian Retian. Mass extinction, full recovery of woody trees, coals, returned scleractinian corals and calcified sponges. An approximate timescale of key Triassic events. Axis scale. Millions of years ago. The Triassic is usually separated into early, middle, and late Triassic epochs, and the corresponding rocks are referred to as lower, middle, or upper Triassic. The faunal stages from the youngest to oldest are. Paleogeography. During the Triassic, almost all the Earth's landmass was concentrated into a single supercontinent centered more or less on the equator, called Pangaea. From the east a vast gulf entered Pangaea, the Tethys Sea. It opened farther westward in the mid-Triassic, at the expense of the shrinking Paleotethys Ocean, an ocean that existed during the Paleozoic. The remaining shores were surrounded by the world ocean known as Panthalassa. All the deep ocean sediments laid down during the Triassic have disappeared through subduction of oceanic plates. Thus, very little is known of the Triassic open ocean. The supercontinent Pangaea was rifting during the Triassic, especially late in the period, but had not yet separated. The first non-marine sediments in the rift that marks the initial breakup of Pangaea, which separated New Jersey from Morocco, are of late Triassic age. In the U.S., these thick sediments comprise the Newark group. Because of the limited shoreline of one supercontinental mass, Triassic marine deposits are globally relatively rare. Despite their prominence in Western Europe, where the Triassic was first studied. In North America, for example, marine deposits are limited to a few exposures in the West. Thus Triassic stratigraphy is mostly based on organisms living in lagoons and hypersaline environments, such as East Theria crustaceans. Africa. At the beginning of the Mesozoic era, Africa was joined with Earth's other continents in Pangaea. Africa shared the supercontinent's relatively uniform fauna, which was dominated by theropods, prosauropods and primitive ornithischians by the close of the Triassic period. Late Triassic fossils are found throughout Africa, but are more common in the south and north. The boundary separating the Triassic and Jurassic marks the advent of an extinction event with global impact. Although African strata from this time period have not been thoroughly studied, South America at Paleorota Geopark, located in Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil, the Santa Maria Formation and Catarita formations are exposed. In these formations, one of the earliest dinosaurs, Staurikosaurus, as well as the mammal ancestors Brazilitherium and Brazilodon have been discovered. Climate. The Triassic climate was generally hot and dry, so that typical deposits are red bed sandstones and evaporites. There is no evidence of glaciation at or near either pole. In fact, the polar regions were apparently moist and temperate, a climate suitable for forests and vertebrates, including reptiles. Pangaea's large size limited the moderating effect of the global ocean. Its continental climate was highly seasonal, with very hot summers and cold winters. The strong contrast between the Pangaea supercontinent and the global ocean triggered intense cross-equatorial monsoons. Although the Triassic may have mostly been a dry period, at least at tropical and subtropical latitudes in the Tethys and surrounding lands, evidence exists that it was punctuated by several episodes of increased rainfall. Sediments and fossils suggestive of a more humid climate are known from the Anisian to Ladinian of the Tethys domain, and from the Carnian and Rhaetian of a larger area that includes also the Boreal domain, the North American continent, the South China block and Argentina. The best studied of such episodes of humid climate, and probably the most intense and widespread, was the Carnian pluvial event. Life. 3 categories of organisms can be distinguished in the Triassic record: holdovers from the Permian-Triassic extinction, new groups which flourished briefly, and other new groups which went on to dominate the Mesozoic world. Flora on land. The surviving vascular plants included the lycophytes, the dominant cycadophytes, ginkgophyta, ferns, horsetails and glossopterids. The spermatophytes, or seed plants, came to dominate the terrestrial flora. In the northern hemisphere, conifers, ferns and bennettitails flourished. Glossopteris was the dominant southern hemisphere tree during the early Triassic period. Marine fauna. In marine environments, new modern types of corals appeared in the early Triassic, forming small patches of reefs of modest extent compared to the great reef systems of Devonian times or modern reefs. Serpulids appeared in the Middle Triassic. Microconchas were abundant. The shelled cephalopods called ammonites recovered, diversifying from a single line that survived the Permian extinction. The fish fauna was remarkably uniform, reflecting the fact that very few families survived the Permian extinction. There were also many types of marine reptiles. These included the Sauropterygia, which featured Pachypleurosaurus and Nevosaurs, Plicodonts, and the first Plesiosaurs, the first of the lizard-like Thalattosauria, and the highly successful Ichthyosaurs, which appeared in early Triassic season soon diversified, some eventually developing to huge size during the late Triassic. Terrestrial and limbic fauna. Groups of terrestrial fauna, which appeared in the Triassic period or achieved a new level of evolutionary success during it, include temnospondyls. One of the largest groups of early amphibians, temnospondyls originated during the Carboniferous and were still significant. Once abundant in both terrestrial and aquatic environments, the terrestrial species had mostly been replaced by reptiles. The Triassic survivors were aquatic or semi-aquatic, and were represented by Tupelacosaurus, Thabinchuia, Brachiosauridae and Microphilus. all of which died out in early Triassic, and the successful stereospondylii, with survivors into the Cretaceous era. The largest of these, such as the Mastodonsaurus, were up to 13 feet in length. Rhynchosaurs, barrel-gutted herbivores which thrive for only a short period of time, becoming extinct about 220 million years ago. They were exceptionally abundant in Triassic, the primary large herbivores in many ecosystems. They sheared plants with their beaks and several rows of teeth on the roof of the mouth. Phytosaurs, archosaurs that prospered during the late Triassic. These long-snouted and semi-aquatic predators resemble living crocodiles and probably had a similar lifestyle, hunting for fish and small reptiles around the water's edge. However, this resemblance is only superficial and is a prime case of convergent evolution. Aetosaurs, heavily armored archosaurs that were common during the last 30 million years of the late Triassic but died out at the Triassic-Jurassic extinction. Most aetosaurs were herbivorous, and fed on low-growing plants, but some may have eaten meat. Rauisuchians, another group of archosaurs, which were the keystone predators of most Triassic terrestrial ecosystems. They probably occupied the large predator niche later filled by theropods. Theropods, dinosaurs that first evolved in the Triassic period but did not evolve into large sizes until the Jurassic. Most Triassic theropods, such as the Coelophysis, were only around 1 to 2 meters long and hunted small prey in the shadow of the giant Rauisuchians. Cynodonts, a large group that includes true mammals. The first cynodonts evolved in the Permian, but many groups prospered during the Triassic. Their characteristic mammalian features included hair, a large brain, and upright posture. Many were small but some were enormous and filled a large herbivore niche before the evolution of sauropodomorph dinosaurs. The Permian-Triassic extinction devastated terrestrial life. Biodiversity rebounded with the influx of pioneer organisms, but these were short-lived. Diverse communities with complex trophic structures took 30 million years to re-establish. Temnospondyle amphibians were among those groups that survived the Permian-Triassic extinction, some lineages flourishing briefly in the early Triassic, while others remained successful throughout the whole period, or only came to prominence in the late Triassic. As for other amphibians, the first Lissamphibia, characterized by the first frogs, are known from the early Triassic, but the group as a whole did not become common until the Jurassic, when the temnospondyles had become very rare. Other survivors were the Chronosuchia and Embolomeri, more closely related to amniotes than temnospondyles, but went extinct after some million years. Reptiliomorpha, stem amniotes that gave rise to the amniotes. Most of them were gone in Triassic, but two water-dwelling groups still existed, Embolomeri that only survived into the early part of the period, and the Chronosuchia, which didn't disappear before the end of Triassic. Archosauromorph reptiles, especially archosaurs, progressively replaced the synapsids that had dominated the Permian. Although Cynognathus was a characteristic top predator in earlier Triassic Gondwana, and both Canmyridae-cynodonts and Gomphodonts-cynodonts remained important herbivores during much of the period. By the end of the Triassic, synapsids played only bit parts. During the Carnian, some advanced cynodont gave rise to the first mammals. At the same time, the Ornithodira, which until then had been small and insignificant, evolved into pterosaurs and a variety of dinosaurs. The Cruritacea were the other important archosaur clade, and during the late Triassic these also reached the height of their diversity, with various groups including the Phytosaurs, Aetosaurs, several distinct lineages of Rauisuchia, and the first crocodilians. Meanwhile, the stocky herbivorous rhynchosaurs and the small to medium-sized insectivorous or piscivorous Prolacertiformes were important basal archosauromorph groups throughout most of the Triassic. Among other reptiles, the earliest turtles, like Progonochles and Proterochiosis, appeared during the Nourian. The Lepidosauromorpha, specifically the Sphenodonta, are first known in the fossil record a little earlier. The Procolophonidae were an important group of small lizard-like herbivores. In the Triassic, archosaurs displaced theropsids as the dominant amniotes. This Triassic takeover may have contributed to the evolution of mammals by forcing the surviving theropsids and the mammaliform successors to live as small, mainly nocturnal insectivores. Nocturnal life may have forced the mammaliforms to develop fur and higher metabolic rates. Staurikosaurus feeding on a dicynodont. In Geopark Paleorota, Lystrosaurus was the most common land vertebrate during the early Triassic, when animal life had been greatly diminished. Reconstruction of Proterosuchus, a genus of crocodile-like carnivorous reptile that existed in the early Triassic. Cynognathus was a mammal-like cynodont from the early Triassic. The first true mammals evolved during this period. Coelophysis, one of the first dinosaurs, appeared in the late Triassic. Plateosaurus was an early sauropodomorph, or prosauropod, of the late Triassic. Coal. No coal deposits date from the start of the Triassic period. This is known as the coal gap, and can be seen as part of the Permian-Triassic extinction event. Sharp drops in sea level at the time of the Permo-Triassic boundary may be the proper explanation for the coal gap. However, theories are still speculative as to why it is missing. During the preceding Permian period, the arid desert conditions contributed to the evaporation of many inland seas and the subsequent inundation of these areas, perhaps by a number of tsunami events that may have been responsible for the drop in sea level. This is suggested by the finding of large salt basins in the southwest United States and a very large basin in central Canada. Immediately above the boundary, the Glossopteris flora was suddenly largely displaced by an Australia-wide coniferous flora containing few species and containing a lycopod herbaceous understory. Conifers also became common in Eurasia. These groups of conifers arose from endemic species because of the ocean barriers that prevented seed crossing for over 100 million years. For instance, Podocarpus was located south and pines, junipers, and sequoias were located north. The dividing line ran through the Amazon Valley, across the Sahara, and north of Arabia, India, Thailand, and Australia. It has been suggested that there was a climate barrier for the conifers, although water barriers are more plausible. If so, something that can cross at least short water barriers must have been involved in producing the coal hiatus. Hot climate could have been an important auxiliary factor across Antarctica or the Bering Strait. However, there was a spike of fern and lycopod spores immediately after the close of the Permian. In addition, there was also a spike of fungal spores immediately after the Permian-Triassic boundary. This spike may have lasted 50,000 years in Italy and 200,000 years in China and must have contributed to the climate warmth. An event excluding a catastrophe must have been involved to cause the coal hiatus because fungi would have removed all dead vegetation and coal, forming detritus in a few decades in most tropical places. In addition, fungal spores rose gradually and declined similarly along with the prevalence of woody debris. Each phenomenon would hint at widespread vegetative death. Whatever the cause of the coal hiatus must have started in North America approximately 25 million years sooner. Lagerstätten. The Monte San Giorgio Lagerstätte, now in the Lake Lugano region of northern Italy and Switzerland, was in Triassic times a lagoon behind reefs with an anoxic bottom layer, so there were no scavengers and little turbulence to disturb fossilization. A situation that can be compared to the better-known Jurassic Solnhofen limestone Lagerstätte. The remains of fish and various marine reptiles, along with some terrestrial forms like Tysnosuchus and Macronemus, have been recovered from this locality. All these fossils date from the Anisian-Ladinian transition.